technical skills. What I've found is that I feel like most people who are applying for software role, they tend to over-index on this. Most of the time, we have really great candidates who can do the job. And to me, that's typically not the biggest risk when it comes to hiring, because I know that even if you aren't the best at Elixir or the best at some technology we're using today, we can train you on that as long as you really want to do it and you're a really great culture fit.
Let's transition to another conversation here. Sounds like Axel's in a high growth period. You all are hiring across a number of skill sets in engineering and product. Talk to us a little bit about how you feel engineers can best stand out in the interview process, specific to working with a startup. What do you look for in a background for technologists that you think will thrive in a startup environment?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty simple when it comes down to the fundamentals. The three things we look for is first, can you do the job? Do you have enough technical skills to hit the ground running? The second is, do you want to do the job? Are you motivated? Are you engaged by this opportunity? And the third one, which is a little bit more fuzzy, is the concept of, would you be a good culture fit? And I think this encapsulates the point where it's just like, hey, are you a good fit for an early stage startup? Working backwards from there, the culture, the way that we see that is the team is very, very small. It's really important that the people that we hire are additive to the culture. And it's really easy to have one spoiled apple ruin the whole batch, where as soon as there's negative culture, it starts spreading really quickly. So we try really, really hard to find people who are on our same wavelength or our mentality. But what we basically look for there is two key traits, which is curiosity and tenacity, and then three team traits, which is putting the team first, transparency, and empathy, because we feel like those three working traits just help us thrive as a team. It's a hill that we do die on, where it's just like, hey, if you have a really great engineer, but they just are not empathetic, or you have clear signs that they're not team first, then we will pass on that, because I do think it's very important, as the team is still relatively small and we're growing very quickly. So that's that first thing. And then, do you want the job is the part where I do think there's a lot of opportunity for candidates to stand out. How this comes across from my perspective is it's really through the communication and the enthusiasm and research that they put into your organization. Like, if you show up late on a call, you don't send follow-up emails, and you don't have any questions about the company, this makes me feel like you don't actually want this job. And this is probably not a great fit, because it doesn't seem like you're committed to this opportunity. Coming from a more business background, where my first job was in investment banking, I had a lot of friends who went through consulting. I think throughout those interview process, they really hammered home, like, do research, ask about the company, send follow-up emails, try to network with other people at the organization, which on the software side, I don't see happening quite as much. And I think some of this is because software engineering is obviously very high demand. So sometimes they don't need to do all of these things, but when you do it, you really stand out from the pack. So I'd say my biggest recommendation is be over communicative, try to show a lot of enthusiasm, and demonstrate that this is your top priority job. And then the last one that I mentioned was, can you do the job? And this is kind of the technical skills. What I've found is that I feel like most people who are applying for software role, they tend to over-index on this. Most of the time, we have really great candidates who can do the job. And to me, that's typically not the biggest risk when it comes to hiring, because I know that even if you aren't the best at Elixir or the best at some technology we're using today, we can train you on that as long as you really want to do it and you're a really great culture fit.
That was kind of leading into my next question about, we oftentimes hear from engineers curious about the learning initiatives that are offered at Axel, some of those offerings in terms of getting exposure to new technologies or continuing education, things like that. If you want to just kind of expand on that for a few minutes.
Yeah, I think the support comes through a couple of different forms, right? First, I think what a lot of people think about is just like a financial support, which is like, hey, are you guys allocating budget for people to go to conferences and go to classes? And 100% that's what we do. But then I think there's also these cultural norms that people need to think about too, which is, hey, is your manager going to tell you to take a week and go learn about this new technology when we have so many product features to build? One thing that we do at our company is we have the concept of sprints, but we typically call them cycles. and we'll do a 3-week cycle with a 1-week cool down. So that 1-week cool down is really reserved for the engineers to really explore beyond what they're working on day to day. So they could either be working on different projects, things about the system they might want to improve. Maybe they want to do a lot of research and learning on a very specific thing. So we try to bake that into our overall development process as well. So that's how it comes through there. And then the other thing is just pair programming, sharing resources, making sure that the engineering culture is very collaborative, where people can learn from each other and we're just showing each other new technologies and new tools. As I mentioned, one of the culture traits we screen for is that curiosity trait. And that's something that we really want everyone to embody, and we want to support that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm curious, just from a founder perspective to a fellow founder, I find myself oftentimes very curious on how someone else in a very similar situation navigated certain areas of growth. How do you navigate as somebody who's at the top of the organization when you have questions or you're seeking mentorship or some sort of advisory? Are there areas or forums or communities that you tap into specific to fellow startup peers that you think are valuable resources, and what would those be?
Yeah, it's generally how I approach learning about any topic, but I read a lot of books. I'll skim a lot of business management books and things like that. And a lot of times we can pull out really interesting concepts there. I would say probably the resource that I should be leveraging more, and it's always very, very helpful when I do, is your notion of mentorship. Like we're fortunate to have a lot of good investors on our board, a lot of people in our cap table that can be really helpful. So either founders who've done it in the past or board members or investors, and they're always happy to introduce us to people who can help us work through problems. And I think that's typically how I do a lot of my learning nowadays, because as you mentioned, there's not a lot of founders out there relative to employees. So there's not a lot of good documentation online. And even then, there's not a lot that is relevant to you or timely for you. The world is a much different place today to start a company than it was 10 years ago. So a lot of the advice that I value the most is coming from either mentors or like fellow founders that we stay connected to.